believe that with hard work and the work we're doing and the information we're gathering, we will find out what happened with Jack and Lily.
Now, before I jump into the interview with Rob McCammon, I just want to give people an update on the Gus Lamont case. So I'm sure many of you are aware of this case. This is a case from South Australia, so it's kind of the next state over from mine. And Gus was 4 when he went missing last year from the outback station where his family lived. So South Australia Police were originally saying there is nothing suspicious about the disappearance. However, yesterday they came out and said that it is now considered a major criminal investigation, and they have said that they have a suspect. That suspect is not Gus's parents, but is a person who resides on that property. Obviously, they didn't name the suspect outright, but if you've been following the case, then you would know that they are referring to the grandmother. Now, I will admit I steered clear of this case originally because if you are Australian, you would know that we have a long history of people getting lost in the outback. And when you have a station the size of this station, it is certainly conceivable for a little boy to get lost somewhere out there. However, now that it is actually being looked at as a criminal investigation, I will be doing a video on it tomorrow. I may even manage to do a live stream because this morning I went and collected my MacBook. So a huge thank you to everyone who's been giving me super thanks and buying me a coffee. You have helped me get there. So I will be, after recording this, I'll be having a fiddle around, setting up my MacBook and having a fiddle around to see how I can do StreamYard and share screen and everything like that. It's not something that I'm familiar with because obviously having worked off an iPad, well, originally off an iPhone and then off an iPad, I've not had that option previously to share screen and share news articles. So I'll have a play around this afternoon. If I feel confident, then I will talk about Gus's case tomorrow as a live stream, possibly, maybe. Don't hold me to that. So back to Jack and Lily. And this is the first of the series looking at these latest interviews that have been released from CBC. Now, I wanted to start with Rob McCammon because he's given us a lot of valuable information. Obviously, he's been very careful about how he's given that information, but if you pay attention to what's actually being said, there's a lot to be learned from this interview. I have to say I have found the last couple of interviews with Rob McCammon quite reassuring. Now, I haven't actually watched this in full. These originally dropped just as I was about to go to bed the other night, so I was basically screen recording them while I was organising myself to go to bed and doing other things. So I haven't really paid full attention to what was said in this interview. There's a few things I did pick up on, but I went to rewatch it, and after the first couple of minutes went, well, actually, I might as well just wait and do this when I'm doing my video because there is a lot of important information here. I think my biggest takeaway, though, which I'm going to say at the beginning here, is that there will be justice for Lily and Jack, but we have to be patient. And I'm happy to be patient if that means that that is going to guarantee a conviction. Because we don't just want an arrest. We want an arrest that's going to stick and that is going to come with a conviction. So with that said, let's just jump in and take a look at this interview with Rob McCammon.
Staff Sergeant McCammon, with the case of Jack and Lily, what's the latest?
We continue to gather information and then work any direction that there's more information to gather, review that and look for more opportunities. We continue to take in tips from the public and to review and move forward.
This is essentially the standard reassurance that we've been getting now for several months. They are still very heavily working this case. They are still getting tips. They are still creating tasks based on those tips and creating tasks based on their investigation. So they are definitely working this case hard. They are still full steam ahead. I found the comment that they are continuing to look for more opportunities to be quite telling. That means they're being as creative as possible with that case and trying to find every possible avenue to gain additional information, to gain additional evidence. I recall a case some time back, and I can't remember what the case was, but something that's stuck in my mind since then is, in terms of investigative avenues, a particular law enforcement official said, if you've thought of it, we've probably done it. And I think based on what he's saying here, that definitely applies in this case.
Is this case criminal?
Right now, we're gathering all the information. Once we have all the information necessary, we'll make decisions on any criminality that may be relevant to the case.
I have to say, I really enjoy watching the playoff between these two because I will give it to her. She is really good when it comes to interviewing in terms of pushing for answers. Although that said, if you look at her bio, she's been doing this for 20 years, so she's obviously a very seasoned reporter. But she certainly has a way of asking the right questions and the right lead-ons, etc. Now, she's asked him, is this case criminal? And you'll note that first of all, he did not say, no, this case is not criminal. And obviously, right now, while they are keeping it under the banner of a missing person investigation, then they can't publicly name it up as a criminal investigation. But his answer certainly points in that direction. He says, right now we're gathering all the information. Once we have all the information necessary, we'll make decisions on any criminality that may be relevant to the case. Now, what he's saying here is that they're still filling in gaps in their investigation. And when they have enough information, enough evidence, enough witness statements, in terms of making decisions on any criminality, what he's talking about is when they do have enough to press charges, then they're going to look at exactly what charges they are able to bring. So saying we'll make decisions on any criminality that may be relevant to the case, he's not saying, well, we don't know if it's criminal yet, but, maybe down the track when we get a bit more information, then we might be able to figure out if it's criminal. No, they know it's criminal. That what he is saying is that in terms of the criminality, until they have enough evidence, enough information, then they won't know precisely what the best avenue to go down is in terms of specific charges. And in terms of how this looks, I think it's probably more similar to Australia than the United States. So what happens is the RCMP, they gather all their information, they look at what they've got in terms of what charges they can possibly make, and they may seek advice from a public prosecutor, who in Canada is called a Crown prosecutor, because Canada and Australia, we're Commonwealth countries, so our prosecutors basically are under the Crown. But the actual decision to lay charges is up to the RCMP. So they may approach the Crown prosecutor for advice, give them a package and say, do you think we've got enough here? Are you going to prosecute this if we make this arrest? But they don't have to do that. I would imagine they've also got their in-house legal experts who are going to also look at that sort of thing. And I mean, you've got a lot of seasoned investigators too who are going to know where they stand with this. Once charges have been laid, that's when the package goes to the Crown prosecutor. And the Crown prosecutor has what is known as prosecutorial discretion, meaning they can look at it and say, yeah, actually, I can't prosecute this. Or they can look at it and say, okay, yep, I can prosecute this, let's go ahead. So even though charges can be laid by the RCMP, once those charges are laid, they've still got to get it past the Crown Prosecutor. They've still got to have a decent enough case that when they lay those charges, the prosecutor can look at it and say, yep, you've got a case. So this is what he's talking about in terms of making decisions on any criminality relevant to the case. They've got to collect everything they've got and stop, take a look and decide what charges would we be able to put with these things. They may decide that they don't have enough evidence yet and continue with the investigation. Or they may decide, okay, if this is the charge that we are going to go ahead with, yes, we've got enough here. Maybe they'll ask the Crown Prosecutor for advice. Take a look over this file. Do you think we can prosecute? Or maybe they will just go ahead with it if they are super confident and then give the package to the prosecutor. So this statement just in itself shows us that, yes, the case is criminal. But in terms of criminality, they haven't landed on exact charges yet. Or they may have an idea of the charges that they want to lay, but they need to make sure they've collected all their evidence or their information first before they can look at it and say, can we get this charge through, or do we have to look at a lesser charge? Now, obviously, unless there is something really glaring that they look at and go, well, okay, a defence attorney is going to use this as a mitigating circumstance and this could blow our case. If they're looking at it and going, yeah, this isn't enough for this charge that we want to lay, if there is a possibility of gathering more evidence and more information, then yeah, they are going to go back and continue with the investigation until they have everything that they need to be able to make sure that the charge that they want to lay is accessible to them.
Are you treating this as criminal?
Again, we gather all of our information in any of these situations to a judicial standard in case there is information that identifies criminality. And that is part of our job, is to gather all the information so that we can make good decisions with it.
I think every single one of the interviews that Angela McIver has done, you can tell that she is totally aware of what is being said. She's getting the subcontext in everything that people say. We've seen her nail Daniel on a few occasions, and when she is interviewing Rob McCammon, she basically gets straight to the point of it based on his previous statements. So he's danced around her question of, is this case criminal? But he's given enough information that basically indicates, yes, it is. We're just working on getting enough evidence and information together to put this case to test. In other words, to lay charges and take it to the prosecution. And she's picked up on what he said. So then she's like, are you treating this as criminal? She understands exactly what's going on. She knows it's a criminal investigation. And she's trying to get a response out of him that is a really, really clear indication that that is the case. It's like a chess match with players that are equally matched. So in response to her asking, are you treating this as a criminal investigation? He says, we gather all our info to judicial standards. What does he mean there? It means we are following every single legal protocol to make sure that every single bit of evidence that we've collected, every single interview that we've done, every bit of information will hold up in court. So while we're still getting lines like, oh, we have to protect the integrity of the investigation in case it does pivot to become a criminal case, essentially what he's saying is, yes, the way we are investigating it is exactly the same way that we investigate a criminal case. Now, sure, when cases like this first arise, you may hear comments like, we treat every case as criminal until we can establish that it isn't. But we are 9 months in. So for him to be making these comments still shows you that this case has been treated criminal from day 2. They haven't gone beyond that. And of course, all the work that they are putting in, that's not work for a children wandered off into the woods. It's not work for children were abducted by someone, because they have continually made it really, really clear that there is no evidence of an abduction. And if there was evidence of an abduction, they would then release information to the public to get help with that. If there was no evidence of an abduction, they couldn't be working on this massive, massive investigation, because they would have nothing to investigate if it was an abduction with no evidence. So the only possible thing is criminality. The only way they could be continuing to gather information, continuing to get tips from the public, continuing to allocate tasks based on tips or based on existing tasks, is if it is a criminal case. Because clearly, if it was an abduction with no evidence, that's a dead end. There's nothing to investigate. If the children wandered off into the woods, again, that's a dead end. There's nothing to investigate. Unless they're going to sit there and all sit around and examine that one boot print that was found. But not only does this statement show us that, yes, they are treating it as a criminal investigation, it also shows us that they are determined to dot every single I and cross every single T, so that when an arrest does actually happen, everything is going to be in order. I think based on all the statements we've had so far, we can be confident that the moment an arrest is made is the moment that we know justice will be served. Sure, you've always got that added variable of a jury, and that can sometimes be a bit dicey, but based on everything they're saying, they're going to make sure that the case that goes to court is something that is going to convince a jury. He's talking about judicial standards. Everything is under scrutiny in terms of this case right now.
Can you explain how that works under the Missing Persons Act?
Well, basically the Missing Persons Act gives us the ability to get judicial authorization to pursue different more private information that we can then gather to review for any tips or leads, directions to go to find more information.
Now, as you've probably gathered by now, I am choosing not to discuss any of his body language during this interview, because the goal here for all of us is the same. His goal here is justice for Lily and Jack. So I'm not calling him out on anything that shows that he's holding things back, because we know he's holding things back anyway. I'm just discussing the language, basically. So what I'm saying here is, if you have been following my channel for some time and you are familiar with body language, it is definitely worth watching his body language while he is talking, because he is definitely telling more through his body language. Not in a bad way, just in a... it helps us understand the dilemma he's in, and in some instances also add a little bit more context to what he is saying. Now, she's asked him specifically how all this fits in under the Missing Persons Act, and he's said his own version of what I've been saying for months. So he's saying, well, it gives them the ability to get judicial authorisation to pursue, and he starts saying different, and then he changes tack and says more private information. Again, I think I've said this I'd be rich if I got $1 for every time I said this, but it's basically about the difference between having to provide burden of proof in a request for a warrant as opposed to having to simply lay out a reason why this particular thing that you are seeking judicial authority for could be helpful for investigating this missing persons case. So just for example, if we look at the requests that they made for banking records for Daniel and Malaya, if they were investigating this as a criminal case, then not only would they have to prove why having access to those bank records is going to have some bearing on proving the criminality of the case, but they've also got to outlay what their evidence is that they currently have that proves that it is criminal and proves that they are entitled to this private banking information. Because, of course, the big thing when you're investigating a criminal case is privacy and, of course, legality. Saying, oh, well, this is a criminal case and we'd like to look at the bank records just in case there's something in there that we can find, that wouldn't cut it. You've got to prove the connection. We think that they purchased something, or we think that they have lied about where they were during this period of time. You know, something that is going to connect directly to the charges that they intend to pursue. Whereas in the missing persons case, it can just be a case of, we just want to look at the banking records just to double check against their story and see if there's any inconsistencies to follow up on. They're not suggesting that they've done anything wrong. They're not suggesting there's any criminality to it. They're just saying this could actually help us just to figure things out. It's going to help us get a clearer picture of their movements the day before the children went missing. And, you know, in terms of burden of proof, if it was just for the Missing Persons Act, then really all they have to show is, well, we know that they went into town and we just want to double check their story to see if they've missed telling us anything significant. We just want to double check because this will confirm their timeline for us. They don't have to prove anything. All they have to say is how it connects somehow to the missing person, and not that it's going to prove anything against anyone. Whereas it could be, if it was a criminal case, then we want a warrant for these bank accounts because we believe that while they were in town on the Thursday, that they maybe stopped somewhere and met with someone, and Daniel purchased something that he then took home with him and imbibed in, or, you know, had at home, and this may have caused to an altered mood, which may have resulted in what occurred in the house. But for that, they would have to prove, they would have to produce evidence to show that that is why they believe that. So it is much, much harder for them to get all the records that they need. And of course, it also means that when it goes to court, it is harder for a prosecutor to challenge it, because the prosecutor can't turn around and say this was an unlawful seizure of the cell phone. I don't know where that's coming from, because they have all these additional powers under the Missing Persons Act. So it actually, not only does it make it easier at the investigation side of it, but it makes it easier in the prosecution side of it, because it makes it so much harder for the defence to turn around and claim undue process. And like you said, doing it under the Missing Persons Act, all they have to say when they're requesting permission to get access to bank records or something is that it may lead us to additional investigative avenues. They don't have to prove that it's going to lead them to additional investigative avenues. They just have to say, well, we think that it's possible that this could help us go down another road in terms of how we investigate this case.
The children's stepfather, Daniel Martel, has also indicated that recently his DNA sample was taken. Why now?
Because it was the appropriate time, or we felt it was time to collect that information, of course. Sometimes DNA doesn't necessarily, not because anybody's a suspect, but to maybe we may find DNA in places where we expect it to be found, and we need to be able to eliminate people. So it's something that we do, especially in missing persons cases, that to collect that information, to make sure it's safeguarded.
I honestly felt his discomfort at trying to answer that without giving too much away. Now, we know, because Daniel has stated it, and I think they also mentioned it, RCMP also mentioned it to reporters at one point in time, that the reason that they collected a blood sample from Daniel for DNA is in connection with the piece of blanket. So this helps us put things together, and this is exactly what I was saying some time back when we found out that Daniel had given this blood sample. So of course she put him on the spot. Why did you do this now? Why the need for this now? Obviously the obvious answer here, which he's steered around, because I guess even though it's been discussed in the past about the DNA sample being for the blanket, it sounds like this is something they would prefer us to possibly not be discussing too much on. But basically, we know that they got the forensic results back from that blanket in around October or November. So having received those results, they would have done a review of the report that they received from those results. And what he's telling us here, appropriate timing, well, of course it's the appropriate timing. They need this DNA sample in connection with the forensic results relating to this piece of blanket. So immediately that tells us that probably his DNA is on that blanket. Now, you could turn around and say, well, of course it's going to be on that blanket because it came from the house. So it should have Daniel's DNA on it. And that's what he's saying here. So he starts out by saying, sometimes we collect DNA not necessarily because somebody is a suspect, but because we find DNA in places where we expect to find it, and we need to eliminate people. What does all this mean? We know this is talking about the blanket. What he's saying is that they expected that they were going to find Daniel's DNA profile, Malaya's DNA profile, probably the children, well, definitely Lily's DNA profile. And what he's saying is that they need samples of all these DNA profiles so that they can eliminate every single DNA profile that is found on that blanket to see if there are any unidentified profiles on that blanket. So if they've gone through and they've collected everyone's DNA, they've matched it to all the DNA samples on that blanket, and there is no outstanding DNA, that means nobody else had access to that blanket outside of the people in that house. This, for starters, will rule out the allegations of the blanket being planted by any of Malaya's family, because they will be able to say, we have DNA samples from this blanket, from these locations on the blanket. We have no additional DNA samples, so we know that nobody else handled this blanket, meaning this blanket was either planted there by someone from 1407 Gairloch Road, or this piece of blanket blew off the back of a truck or something. Now, the other reason that they're collecting the DNA samples is because they are going to look at the locations on that piece of blanket where the DNA was found, because that will indicate how that blanket was handled. it could indicate criminal actions if, depending on the location of the DNA samples found on that blanket. And in terms of saying that they have to make sure that info is safeguarded, again, he's talking about judicial standards here. He's saying we have identified DNA in a location where we expected to find it, but we need to rule out the possibility of additional DNA from outside people. But to make sure that this is going to stand up to the judicial process, we have to do it all legally. So we have to make sure that we are doing it with the right paperwork, we are doing it with the correct collection protocols. He's basically saying we have to make sure that this is going to stand up in court. And it very much sounds like he is saying that there are no additional DNA profiles that were discovered, that the only DNA found on that piece of blanket is from the people in that household.
Are any of the children's family members considered suspects in this case?
I wouldn't say anybody's a suspect. Again, we continue to gather information and whatever evidence that we are able to find, and we'll make our decisions based on that. But I'm not in a position to really comment on suspects or anything like that at this time.
So I feel his awkwardness. I would dearly love to be discussing some of the body language with you guys, but I just don't think it's appropriate in a public setting. I may do a members video where I go through some of the things that I've seen, but I just don't feel that it would be the right thing for me to discuss it publicly. But I will say that she is really making him work in this interview. He is having to be on his toes the entire time. So she's asked him, are any of the children's family members considered suspects in this case? And straight off he says, I wouldn't say anybody's a suspect. That means basically, well, yeah, there is a suspect, but I can't say it. When someone starts a sentence with, I wouldn't say this, then there's usually a but on the end. It's just the way it goes grammatically. But in this instance, obviously, he cannot publicly name any suspects because they are still classifying the case as a missing persons investigation. So until they have enough evidence to press charges, that's the route that they're taking, and that's what he's telling us here. And it's clear because at the end he says, I'm not in a position to comment on suspects or anything like that at this point in time. So he's saying, yeah, we've got a suspect in mind, but we need to basically make sure we've got all our ducks in a row before we can name this person as a suspect, because we're doing this under the Missing Persons Act. So at this point in time, no, I'm not in a position to comment on any suspects. He's making it really clear that we will name our suspects when we know that we can make an arrest. You will not know who our suspects are officially until arrests are made. So I think this would be fair to say that this is probably the closest he's come so far to admitting that they do actually have a suspect. At least one. The fact that he finishes it with he's not in a position to comment on suspects, plural, certainly makes me think that there's definitely going to be several people facing charges in relation to this case. And I hope that is the case, because I know a few people have expressed their concerns that this could turn into a Jennifer Soto situation. If you're not familiar with the Maddie Soto case, Jennifer Soto was Maddie's mother, and she basically allowed these things to happen to her daughter, even to the extent that the night that her daughter was Made Not Alive by Stephen Stearns, Jen Soto came home from work and said, I need a good night's sleep. You have to go upstairs and sleep with Stephen. 13-year-old girl sent upstairs to sleep with a 37-year-old man. And this was not the first time this had happened. But Jen Soto never faced any charges for her role in what happened to Maddie Soto. And a few people have expressed their concerns, given the latest developments, that Malaya may not end up facing charges. Well, at the end of the day, at the very least, she will still be done for obstruction of justice. Even if she had no direct role in what happened to the children, she lied to the RCMP. And it appears that she has remained silent for 9 months. I may not be right on that. Maybe she is communicating with them. But at the very beginning of this case, she lied to the RCMP and supported Daniel's story. So unless they've made some sort of arrangement where she is going as state's witness, and I don't know what the Canadian equivalent of that is, but unless they have given her immunity in return for her basically making him swing, then I think there's a pretty damn good chance that regardless of the information that's coming out, regardless of these current charges, that she will still face charges. And of course, I wouldn't be surprised if there's also a number of people who end up suddenly finding themselves facing charges of obstruction. I could imagine that when this all goes down, that there will be simultaneous arrests in a few different locations.
Do you have suspects?
Again, we're working the investigation. I can't comment in detail on where we're going because I have to maintain any integrity of the work we're doing. Anybody in the public who has information that can help us with this are asked to please engage with us and pass that information along so that we can work with it.
Okay, I just can't pass that one up. He is clearly amused by her tenacity. He knows that she knows what he's thinking. Like I said, it's this little chess match. It's a little dance between the two of them. She's trying to get him to admit what she knows that he knows. And he is showing that he's aware that she knows what he knows, but he's not giving it up for her. But again, he has admitted that, yeah, we've got suspects. She's like, have you got suspects? You know, who are you looking at? And he goes on to talk about maintaining the integrity of the work they're doing. Meaning, I'm not going to name our suspects right now because that's going to screw up our case. But then he does throw in also this request for information from the public. So despite his attempt at avoidance, the message here is loud and clear. Yes, he has at least one suspect, and they're still working on this investigation. He doesn't want to say anything because he doesn't want to compromise the integrity of this investigation. But at the same time, any additional information with regards to these particular suspects would be appreciated. It's a standard thing, really, isn't it? We know who our suspects are, we have solid evidence, but any additional evidence that we can get is just going to make our case stronger. You hear prosecutors so often when they're talking about doing a press conference after an arrest has been made, saying we have a mountain of evidence, but we still would like people to come forward with any information that they have. Now, a few people have commented that, well, people aren't going to come forward and give tips because witnesses have been named. But for anyone out there who does have any information that can help with this case, if you happen to live in the area and you think you have some valid information that is a worthwhile tip, but you're afraid of giving that tip because you don't want the people who live in the same area as you, knowing that you've dobbed them into the RCMP, you can do it anonymously. There's multiple ways that you can do it. There is the 1-800 number for Crime Stoppers, which can be anonymous. There's also a secure tip line, like an online tip line that is encrypted. So you can actually go onto if you were to type in Nova Scotia Crime Stoppers and you look for online tips, that is encrypted, meaning that you can give tips that way, and basically you can maintain your anonymity. If you are concerned that, well, maybe they can still get my details from me doing it either way, then there are other options. I myself have passed on a tip that was emailed to me. So I have had someone contact me with a tip, which I then passed on to the RCMP saying, this is a tip from a subscriber, and I did not give the identity of the person to RCMP. So they still got the tip. That person's identity was protected. And I know that other content creators have done the same thing. There's also Please Bring Me Home, who are now involved in this case. And they have stated they will do the same. If you have a tip but you want to remain anonymous, you can contact them with your tip. They will forward your tip on without passing on your identity. That said, I strongly recommend that you don't pass on your tips to someone like Durwood or Kent or Daniel, because clearly your tips might not get through. But, at the end of the day, they do say that the Crime Stoppers website is encrypted. So that is a perfectly safe way to submit anonymous tips. You may think, oh, what if they're not really encrypted? That, to me, that is still the most secure way of submitting a tip. Because I can tell you that I won't pass your tip on to anyone other than the RCMP. And I can reassure you that I've already done this with past tips. But you might have that doubt in your head, because you only know me as this voice on this video. So even though there is no evidence of me coming out and sharing tips on my videos, you may have that little doubt in your head. Likewise, you may feel the same with another content creator. You may not feel comfortable with Please Bring Me Home, especially not given the loose cannon that used to be part of their organisation, who was sharing confidential things that she shouldn't have shared. But I'm saying I am totally reliable, but that's me asking you to believe me. But if you do have a tip, then obviously the most secure way is through Crime Stoppers, Nova Scotia Crime Stoppers. Anyway, moving on from that.
What do you think happened here?
Again, I'm not going to comment on what I think. As a professional investigator, we have to base our direction on evidence and information. So I'm not here to comment on my thoughts, and I'll allow the information we gather to make those decisions.
Again, this is actually quite telling. And when you look at exactly what he's saying, it does make me feel hopeful that we will see an arrest this year. So she's asking him what he thinks happened. And again, he's amused by her tenacity. And I don't blame him. It is amusing. And I mean it in a nice way, because I like this reporter, but she's like this whack-a-mole game. She throws this curveball question at him, trying to catch him out, and he fields it back at her, and she throws it at him again from a different angle, trying to get this answer out of him. And clearly he is amused at how persistent she is. He knows her game. So he says, I'm not going to comment on what I think. As a professional investigator, we have to base our direction on evidence and information. I'm not here to comment on my thoughts. And I'll allow the information we gather to make those decisions. So essentially what he is saying is that they actually do have a fair idea of what happened. It may be that they know precisely what happened, but what he's saying is that we have to let the evidence speak for us. So I'm not going to come out ahead of time, ahead of making any arrests, and tell you what we believe happened. Because even when it goes to court, we are going to present this with the evidence rather than tell you what we believe happened. We are going to present the evidence that demonstrates what happened. Now, this could be that he's saying, we know what happened, we're still trying to put together all the evidence and information. It could be that he's telling us here that they're missing a few crucial things that are going to help them to make a prosecution over the things that they are now aware of that have occurred. Because with any investigation, you start out at one point where you really don't know what's going on, but you start to collect evidence and it starts to create a picture for you of what may have occurred. And as you're collecting that evidence, you figure out what else you need to get to follow up on that evidence. And over time, you fill in the gaps. I guess probably a good comparison would be if you were trying to do a puzzle, but you didn't look at the box before you started. So you have all these puzzle pieces and you've got no idea what the end piece is going to look like. But over time, as you add more and more pieces to that puzzle, you start to realise what the picture is that you are creating. So it seems to me that at the very least, they know what the picture is that they are creating here. They are just making sure that they have every bit of evidence that they need to be able to prove that to a jury. So that when they take this case to court, the jury is going to be able to identify that picture as easily as they do.
From the beginning, RCMP has maintained that this was not an abduction. The families believe that it could have been an abduction. Do you think that that's a possibility here?
Well, if that were something that took place, we will gather the information and we will pursue that, and we will pursue any charges related to anything like that took place. However, again, we don't have any direct evidence of an abduction or anything like that at this time. So.
I don't know how much clearer you could make it. So she's said, look, you've always said it's not an abduction, but the family still believe it could have been. And he's really clear what he's saying here. If it is, if that was something that took place, we would gather the information and pursue that and pursue any charges. However, so he's saying, well, you know, if they can show why they believe that, if they can give us proof of why they believe that, we will pursue that. And we will pursue it for as far as we can, to the point where if it is valid, then we will push charges. But then he says, we don't have any direct evidence of an abduction or anything like that. I don't think he could be any more explicit without saying, no, it is not an abduction, it is a criminal case. Because he's just said, look, you know, if there was any sign that this was an abduction, we would be in boots and all, and we would be deep diving, we would be investigating really hard on this. But we don't have any direct evidence that causes us to investigate in that direction. But at the same time, he has told us how hard they are working on this case, how many tasks they have created and how many tasks have arisen from those tasks. You cannot have such a deep investigation if it's a dead end of they're saying it's a abduction but we've got no proof. They are solidly investigating this case. And he said there's nothing to investigate right now in terms of an abduction. So the only thing that they can be investigating is criminality in terms of something happening on that property to those children and that being covered up. If it was an abduction with no evidence, then 9 months down the track, they would be saying, we need more tips because this case is stalled and we just don't know what happened. But he's not saying that. He's saying we have been working this so very, very hard. And we are doing all this work, all this investigative work, and we are creating new investigative tasks based on the tasks that we have been performing. You can't do that with no evidence. And I know someone's going to jump on the wording of it where he said we have no direct evidence. Clearly, what he's referring to is they've had Durwood coming out with all his BS. They had the fake witness come out and ring RCMP the day after they sat Durwood on his ass over all his lies. And this fake witness made claims that really didn't match up whatsoever with the children, and these claims were a month after the children went missing. And like I said, the very day after, they sent Durwood marching, saying, stop lying, we're going to charge you with obstruction. They have Daniel making allegations against Malaya's family and friends. None of that is direct evidence. That is all hearsay information. So that is what he's referring to when he says we have no direct evidence. Direct evidence would be camera footage of a vehicle. Direct evidence would be CCTV footage from somewhere in Nova Scotia or in Canada of these children somewhere with another person. Direct evidence would be tyre marks outside the property that could not be directly attributed to a vehicle connected with the family. Direct evidence would be geofencing the area around Gerlock Road and coming up with an unknown phone number and then pursuing that. He's saying they have nothing like that. He's saying they have nothing that could lead to a continued investigation in that direction. Given we are 9 months in, like I said, if they have nothing that is going to lead to a continued investigation into an abduction, but they've just spent 9 months working their asses off, that tells you it is 100% not an abduction. Or to quote Durwood, it is 1000% ironclad that it is not an abduction. The sad truth, based on everything we know, based on everything that has been said by the RCMP, is that Lily and Jack are no longer with us.
So you're not pursuing the investigative avenue of an abduction?
We will look in all avenues of investigation. I'm just, that's not evidence or information that we have directly at this time.
So he's making it really, really clear here. They have absolutely no evidence of an abduction. But if something came up that was evidence, then yes, they would pursue those leads. But there is nothing. Honestly, right now, I feel Rob McCammon's pain. He has been saying repeatedly, he was saying this on the 7th of May. There is no sign of an abduction. If there was a sign of an abduction, we would pursue that lead. If there was a sign of an abduction, we would let people know, because obviously they would then put out an Amber Alert and people would be told to look out for this vehicle or look out for this person. Details would be given. I mean, over the last 9 months, we have had constant reminders from the RCMP that no, there is no evidence of an abduction. If there was evidence of an abduction, you would know about it, and we would pursue that as an avenue of investigation. And I realise that for a lot of people that is a painful realisation right now. I think one thing from Durwood's story was that it allowed people to hold on to that hope for a while. But the reality is, everything we are being told by the RCMP points to the children no longer being alive. And they have made it clear that there is no evidence of an abduction. And they're saying if there was, we would pursue that lead. But while they're saying if there was, we would pursue that lead, they're telling us about the countless hours of investigation that's gone into this case. If they're not investigating an abduction, if they're not investigating the children wandering off into the woods, that only leaves one scenario. I'm really not sure how else a person could explain that at this point in time an abduction is not on the cards. Because, and he states quite clearly, there is no direct evidence. All they have is hearsay from Dingbat and his buddy Natasha. And when someone is going online very, very openly defending Daniel, gaslighting Malaya, and pulling stunts like making Malaya do a runner so that she would lose custody of her daughter, then RCMP aren't going to see him as a very credible witness whatsoever. And in fact, he was argumentative with them, he was obstructive, and he was trying to get information from them. That's the only source they have of anything in relation to an abduction.
Why not?
Oh, there could be a number of reasons for that. We may not have found that information yet. There could be a member of the public out there that has a key piece of knowledge that we haven't managed to bring forward yet. There could be a number of reasons for that, and the other one being there may not have been an abduction. So there may not be evidence out there to gather. Again, that's why we have to let the information we gather dictate our decisions and direction.
I would love to hear their conversation off camera, because we know that this Angela McIver sees through everything. She's extremely astute when it comes to reporting. She's merely asking these questions because they are something that have been pushed really hard. She knows the answers to these. But obviously this interview is for the sake of the viewing public. And the viewing public have been told by Dingbat and Daniel that Malaya organised for someone to abduct the children and hide them away somewhere. So the question that she gives him is, why not? As in, why is this not an avenue that is being pursued? Why is there no direct evidence of an abduction? She's just doubling down here. And I have no doubt that the purpose here is to try and finally put this abduction thing to bed once and for all. So his response is, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but he gives it so dry that you would almost think that he's being like super serious here. And I guess there is that element of, well, you know, this is how an investigation would work. But I'm sure he was just fighting the urge to roll his eyes. So he said, well, we may not have found that info yet. Or a witness that may have information may not have come forward with that information. Or there could be a number of reasons. And of course, the other one being, there may not have been an abduction. He's trying to be extremely diplomatic here. But at the end of the day, there was no evidence, there is no evidence of an abduction. And it's been an extensive investigation. So for starters, if there was an abduction, they would have discovered evidence of that by now. But aside from that, if there was an abduction and they haven't found the evidence of it, then what the heck have they been doing so very intensely for the last 9 months? They have to be following leads. They have to be developing new tasks from original tasks, meaning that it is an active, ongoing investigation. It couldn't be an active, ongoing investigation if it was an abduction with no evidence. They would be sitting in their offices twiddling thumbs going, what do we do now?
The families say that on May 2nd, they were told by an RCMP member on scene that an Amber Alert would be issued, and that did not happen. Why not?
I can't comment on the commentary that may have happened between a member and the family at the scene, but when it comes to the Amber Alert, the criteria for an Amber Alert wasn't met. We didn't have the necessary pre-qualifiers to issue an Amber Alert. However, we did issue vulnerable persons alerts related to the disappearance of Jack and Lily, and that was the appropriate kind of direction with the information we had at the time.
Looking back, was that the right call?
Yeah.
Now, without having gone thoroughly over that interview yet, from just going through it quickly, I believe that it was Cheryl who claimed that someone had said to the family on May the 2nd that there was going to be an Amber Alert, and then it didn't happen. This is Cheryl who, on that Foggy Woman's channel, claimed that yes, she was there when they found the piece of blanket. And then in this most recent interview, she said that she wasn't there when they found the piece of blanket, but she was shown the location later when the blanket was still there. So she's not really proven to be the most truthful person and the most reliable person. So either, in my opinion, what has happened is someone has got the wrong end of the stick. Someone has said, what about an Amber Alert? It's probably been explained quite clearly to them that if we had these things that would qualify for an Amber Alert, then we would do it. And I think Cheryl's probably got the wrong end of the stick, heard them say something like that, and decided that means they should have made an Amber Alert. And he's made a very valid point there. The criteria was not met. They cannot issue an Amber Alert without a vehicle that's been identified or an individual that's been identified. There are very, very clear criteria when it comes to an Amber Alert. And he says, look, we did issue a vulnerable persons alert. And he points out that was the appropriate direction based on the information that they had at the time. And it is still the appropriate direction because the information hasn't changed. There is still nothing available that would warrant putting out an Amber Alert. And she asks him, looking back, was that the right call? And he says, yeah. And I agree. What you've got to understand is when a vulnerable person's alert goes out, the radius for where that gets sent out is basically calculated based on how long the children have been missing. I believe it is 100 kilometres per hour because that is basically what you would expect a vehicle to travel at. Now, early on in the case, I made the comment that it seems like the Amber Alert is broken. It seems like maybe they need to review it and look at a way to update it. But the more I think about it, the more I realise that actually the Amber Alert it's almost been superseded by these vulnerable persons alerts. there is a much broader range of criteria when it comes to putting out a vulnerable persons alert. And here's the thing. The Amber Alert came into place in 1996. This is when very few people had mobile phones. The Amber Alert didn't go out to people's mobile phones. The Amber Alert was set up so that it would be broadcast on radio stations, on television stations, and put on signage on the side of roads. So in terms of the scope, the original scope of the Amber Alert, it was really only going to people who were listening to the radio, watching the television, or driving past those particular signs. And yes, now, if there's an Amber Alert, it's going to be going to mobile phones across the entire area. But so is a vulnerable persons alert. So when you look at it that way, a vulnerable persons alert is actually way more efficient than the original Amber Alert. Because instead of it just being broadcast on the radio, instead of it only being heard by maybe a quarter of the population who just happen at the right time to be listening to the radio or watching the television or something, they're targeting nearly the entire population of the area. So when you look at it that way, a vulnerable persons alert is still incredibly efficient. And by putting that out, because there's there's very few of the criteria for an Amber Alert, that also preserves the importance of the Amber Alert. Because if you have a known abduction, you have a very, very small window of time to actually track down that individual and find the child. Because the majority of abductions do not end with a child being returned home to their family still alive, essentially. I can't remember the statistics right now, but it is a small, very, very small window of time when it comes to a real abduction. And the longer the time goes on, the smaller the chance of that child being recovered alive. So I can understand the need to preserve the Amber Alert as being the utmost important alert. And if it's going out every time children are reported missing and there's no sign of an abduction, then people will become desensitised. Whereas if people see Amber Alert, it's not something that they see regularly, it's going to be something that they do pay attention to. At the end of the day, putting out a vulnerable persons alert as opposed to an Amber Alert, it's still hugely efficient. And in a situation like this, then it is notifying people, these children are missing, we don't exactly know what's going on just yet. Stay tuned. So yeah, I think Rob McCammon has made a really good point here. Just because an Amber Alert didn't go out doesn't mean there wasn't any alert. Now, I'm going to end this one here and then pick up again hopefully tomorrow. I've got a few things on tomorrow, so I'm not sure what my schedule is going to look like in terms of actually getting anything done. But my next video will be the second half of this, because I thought it was really important to really dig into this interview, because I do believe that Rob McCammon has given us a lot of information. I may attempt to do a live stream tomorrow morning when I get up, which would be afternoon, possibly early evening for Canadians, and I'm kind of losing track now in terms of the United States. But obviously that's going to depend on all the other commitments I have tomorrow, because I definitely want to get this second half of this video done. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to finish there. So thanks for listening. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit that like button and please leave a comment below. So thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Into